All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm sitting here with Jason Schweitzer. Your YouTube channel, Jason, is Almond Tree, correct?
Yep,
Okay.
that's it.
And I've had a chance to see some of your videos, but not. I would just say a handful. Like, how would you describe like kind of what
Oh, it's
Almond
kind
Tree
of
is
a
about, and kind of what your project is all about here?
oh gosh, it's kind of a mess. I don't know. That's a hard question to answer. I don't even know that I have a project necessarily. I'm not because people have asked me that, like, what is it you're doing? What is it you're interested in? I'm not really sure. I just like to get other people's stories, and I guess I like to observe and watch and see, and I think my channel feels kind of like just like kind of a hodgepodge of just random conversations where sometimes them will just be really spontaneous, just spur of the moment. Hey, is anyone free? Let's just chat and record it, see what happens. And then other times it's more planned where I'll try to schedule it and have someone on. Um, but yeah, I don't know, just trying to, I guess, look from all sides. I really like being able to, the more people I can pull into conversations, the more I like it because it seems like everybody's able to see something different. And there's a verse in Song, or not a verse, but a portion of scripture in Song of Solomon um, that just kind of always, it's for years, it's kind of reminded me of that, of each person kind of being their own. It says, a garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. And it goes into all this garden imagery. And like each person, I feel like is kind of that way. They're just like
Hmm.
this garden shut up with so many treasures inside of them. So everybody's got their own gifts to bring. Yeah, but I don't really know what I'm doing. And the uh, purpose of it, hopefully, I guess just through all the conversations, somebody will get blessed out of it and someone will see some truth and some light. And I mean, I myself have been it's crazy amounts just discovering new things all the time from what people have to say and different ways of looking at things. So I'm hoping other people can find the same thing.
Cool.
And I
Cool.
get,
And
yeah.
and like what would you like as far as just maybe fill in a little bit of detail for me, because you and I are just kind of getting to know each other. Like a little bit of like what your background is. I mean, I'm assuming you're coming at things obviously from a Christian perspective, but
Yeah.
I beyond that, and that you live out in the East Coast and you got some cool thoughts in your head. I don't know much about you. So,
Not that cool. Yeah, I grew up in the church. So basically I was born in Florida, lived there till I was probably 8, and we moved up to East Tennessee. That's where I'm at now.
mhm,
Um, just north of Chattanooga. So
okay.
and then I basically, I guess kind of the usual thing. I grew up in church.
What
My
kind of
parents,
church?
it was non-denominational, but it was Word of Faith Ministries. Like
Okay.
really, Rhema Bible College. It was
I
very, very much based off that
Raymond
college.
Blackwell College. Okay. I'm
Um,
not super familiar, but
it's out in Oklahoma. Kenneth Hagin Sr.
okay.
is,
Okay.
yeah,
Gotcha.
okay, yeah.
Gotcha.
And so in his teachings, like Kenneth Hagin Sr., I from what I've listened to and stuff, I enjoy quite a bit of it, and he's a great storyteller. But that like everything that you can go in a ditch one way or the other. So there's lots of the health, wealth, and prosperity gospel. I think came out of that whole
Yeah.
section a lot too. So there's a lot of bad stuff, but there is a lot of good too that I think gets overlooked because of the bad. But so anyways, that being said, uh grew up in that, then probably, sometime early college, I got resentful at the church. I was like, oh, a bunch of hypocrites, I guess the usual thing where you're like,
Mhm.
I'm more, they're not loving enough sort of thing. It's just stupidity looking back on it now, like a excuse to be resentful or something. Um, and so I just stopped going to church, started partying, I guess, and then did that for a while. Now, really, I mean, all that being said, like that doesn't even strike me as bad. It was just kind of the slow path of like resentment I kept getting
Mhm.
further into. Then eventually, about I think when I was 21, no, I think when I was 21, I bought my house because it was right in the foreclosure market. So I had like enough money saved up, bought it, and then I had lived out in the country by myself with like 2 dogs for like 10 years. And then so I didn't really have any friends, anybody. They slowly like chipped away, then it was just me. And then just I always loved, I think I enjoyed people, like one-on-one, but as humanity as a whole, I still don't like crowds, but I just kept getting more and more resentful and bitter. Then, um, the worst part, I think the darkest part of my life is always described as when I was like, it just got in total hatred for my neighbor because he would steal stuff from me all the time, and I didn't really
Uh,
care that much. I mean, I cared, but it was like, well, it's just me. Then he stole a tool from my dad. It was like a saw, and then I went to. I mean, it was he didn't really steal it. Like I thought it was his tool, so I gave it like went and returned it to him, and then realized it was my dad's. Went and asked for it back, and then he just denied it. And so then I, for some reason, twisted that and kind of gave myself an excuse to hate the man, because I was like,
mhm,
you can steal from me, that's one thing, but when it's my dad, then burn in
mhm,
hell type thing. So I remember thinking, um, I want him to die only if I'm 100% certain he's going to hell.
mhm,
And I just remember it, and all your Christian background is there, and I just remember thinking, I know I have to forgive him, but it's like you don't even know how at that point because there's just so much hatred. But I just remember physically making me want to vomit. I would see him and just like want to just puke. So that
mhm,
was the worst part. And then I just basically just would have to tell myself I forgive him when I didn't even think I did. And now
mhm,
I don't know if I could love a person more, which is the strangest thing. It's like I
mhm,
haven't even he ended up moving away. Like I haven't talked to him in now, but it's like I would easily die for the man at this point.
mhm,
It's weird how like that forgiveness will do that even in your own self. So that was the darkest part. But then what kind of I think brought me back towards Christianity was all the really selfish reasons because I guess it was nerve damage in my face. I'm more inclined. I would like the mystical route better, and I just say it was a demon. But
mhm,
for like 9 years, I had this recurring pain that would come, um, and nobody could ever diagnose it, and no painkillers would dull it. I mean, I would take, uh, well, I could half the time I couldn't get pain pills because people thought I was just making it up to get stuff. But I remember one time I took, I think it was like eight 400 milligram ibuprofen and like I don't know, like 10 BC powders, like all in one, just because I didn't have anything else, and it just tore my stomach up. So
yeah, yeah,
yeah, so that pain, I think 9 years of that got to the point where I just basically said, uh, I think I even told my mom that I just said I'm gonna kill myself because I can't live with it. Like I'm not. There's no way I'm gonna make it through a lifetime of this. And so um, then she gave me a book. It was actually by Kenneth Hagin on healing, and I just started reading through that. And it was mostly teachings, but every teaching had some scripture in it. And so um, read through that, and then I guess you could say God healed me through that. There's a lot of things that went into. I mean, I know it wasn't just reading this book, or just like
mhm,
believe enough or anything like that. It was a lot of things, and co-working with repentance and turning back to God in true humility.
mm,
There's just a lot of details, I guess, in it that happened because as soon as I started believing for the healing too, the pain, um, was worse than ever, and then it wouldn't let up either too, which is weird because it's like it would come and go. It would usually last for a few hours, but then I mean, it was just like almost relentless after that, and it lasted longer. Period wise, because it would usually come for a month and then go away for a few months, come back. So that's why people thought it was seasonal, but it wasn't anything allergies related. But anyway, I'm rambling. I feel like I'm rambling on and on. But
no, it's okay.
okay. And then yeah, it lasted for longer. I think it lasted like 2 months, and then it just absolutely broke me. But it got to the point where it was like um I remember it was one day it did not stop at all. This intense pain all day long. And then I just remember coming to that point of like, God, you're not even there. Like the whole my God, why have you forsaken me type thing.
Mhm,
And then I went out and I was reading that book and I just opened it and it was some verse in Isaiah. Gosh, why can't I remember it now? They shall mount up with eagle's wings, they shall run, not get weary, they shall walk. And for some reason it was just like, there you are, God. And then it was just I remember thinking, even if I'm gonna have this pain every second of every day, if I can just get these moments, I can keep going. If you're actually gonna be there, like, and then when you can feel something shift, but you're not sure what it is. Like nothing actually changes in the physical or anything. Like the pain didn't go away, but it was definitely like a turning point. Maybe it was psychological. I don't know. Um, and then basically, I remember thinking that by the time I finished the book, I wouldn't have any more pain. And after I finished the book, it went away, and it basically has been gone ever since. I think it came back shortly after my dog died for some reason, and then just like it's just things happen in such strange ways because it came back and it was literally almost, it felt like just like a test or something. It was just because it only was there for like maybe a few days, and then I was just it was just really strange experience. But basically, it's been gone. So that, and I had warts all over my body. I guess you could say that's some form of leprosy. I don't know. So basically, I kind of came back to God for selfish reasons, for like they get healed, and then, which, he's merciful and he did that. But like I said, it broke me to the point where that wasn't what it was about anymore. It was like, even if I don't get it, even if I'm gonna be in pain forever, I'm still gonna keep pursuing you. Um, So but I don't want to say like anybody has to get to that point necessarily. Like God will heal people on a dime if he wants to. So I don't know. So that's kind of my story back into Christianity. And that was maybe 5 years ago. And my dog passed away 2019. And then those are just kind of big moments in my life. And then so I've just kind of been pursuing God since then, reading the scriptures as much as I can and stuff like that. So I don't know. That's
Interesting.
guess
Yeah, I mean, I have I would say probably like in terms of like my experience, because Hagen he strikes me as part, kind of broadly speaking, and within charismatic Christianity, right?
Oh yeah.
And so, and I've always been somewhat adjacent to that for most of my life, where I've had family members that are kind of more traditional, like Bible believing Baptists type deal, but then in the same family, like Assemblies of God type charismatics, and from the Four Square movement, and those kinds of things. And so that's always been kind of in the background of my experience, where I've kind of had, in a sense, a foot in both worlds in some way. And I mean, I think that the the idea that God heals or God speaks, or that he's direct and active in the life of his people and in the life of this world, like I have no problem with that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's just, I think for me, what's interesting is it's just because of my own faith journey has taken me more, from like conservative evangelical through like Reformed Calvinism, is there's just certain elements within like the charismatic aspects of Christianity that they just seem foreign to me. It's not like they seem wrong. I mean, the health and wealth and prosperity stuff, I think I don't take that very seriously. But there are, there are some things within charismatic theologies and experiences that I'm like, oh yeah, like for real, like they're onto something, and I think that where I found it, I think I've gravitated more toward like the mysticism of Eastern Christianity, even though I'm not Orthodox, and I never will be. I've worshiped within an Anglican, within the Episcopal Church here, kind of progressive Christianity. But I think that the vitality of the experience of God, it definitely can take a lot of different shapes and forms, within different faith communities and different traditions. I think it's important. And so like when yeah, it'll be interesting when you're at like charismatic prayer meetings and those kinds of things, where people are laying hands on each other and healing each other, or delivering a word of knowledge
Oh
or
yeah.
wisdom or something like that. And sometimes you're like, man, like, I'm going to be honest with you, like, that's pretty right on. Like, I don't know how you would
Oh
know
yeah.
this information, and, under what, but it's like, there's definitely, I think that the Spirit is active in that, even if it's
Yeah.
not necessarily like, a context I would be inclined to join, like a charismatic church. You know what I mean? It's like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, but they're onto something, and I love hanging out with
Yeah.
them, and it's
Yeah,
a
they're
cool.
fun. Yeah, it's definitely. I think Chris. I can never say his last name. Starts with a P. You've probably seen someone. I don't know. He said one time, like talking about charismatic circles, he called it kind of a circus, and I was like, yeah, I can kind of get like that. But the funny thing too is a lot of people that are in them kind of realize that too. It can go.
Mhm.
It's hard to describe because it's just extremely chaotic sometimes, and like you get into these big, especially really really um big worship like rock concert kind of shows and stuff. It's like that stuff's very real, and I think people are genuine, and they're whether the people on stage are or not is kind of beside the point. I think people are really there to worship God and direct the energy upwards. But then with all the energy in the room, it's like people just you feel stirred up, I guess. So people will just say think they have words from God. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. And then being encouraged also like, well, you got to step out and try. Um, so I think it's just gosh, if people are more aware of these things and kind of I don't want to say take things lightly because then that's just dumb because you could get a very serious word straight from God through someone else's mouth. Like that does
Mhm.
happen. Um
Mhm.
and people do get healed. But then, there are people that get healed in those services, and then they go home and their sickness comes back too. Um so like I mean, it's just kind of weird because you could probably explain a lot of these things away psychologically, or like even talking about
Mhm.
like the placebo effect, things like that. But then I don't know that it makes it any less credible to me. I'm like, why does that matter? Like if God is a conscious being, like, and that works through your psychological aspect, your consciousness, like I don't know
Mhm.
why that necessarily has to be downgraded or anything.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's interesting, but it's yeah, it can definitely go over the edge in a lot of areas. And I don't subscribe to the health, wealth, and prosperity thing either. And I think sometimes it's gotten me arguments in the past, like because where church I've been at, because I really the the wealth thing bothers me a lot. The health thing's a little harder to deal with because it's like it, when people are so hard line on it. Basically, I think the church I'm in now and churches I've always been in the past would say God never makes you sick or never afflicts you or anything like that. And I'm like, I don't necessarily agree with that because of my own personal experience. Like
Mhm.
I had pain for 10 years, and it was, what's it say in the Psalms? It was good for me that I was afflicted. Like it was good for me. Otherwise I wouldn't be where I'm at now. I'd still be, so I don't know. There's certain things I don't agree with, but the wealth thing always I think gets me the most because I'm like, you can't take anything with you. So like, why do you need to
Yeah.
have all this stuff? But in the majority of it, though, I think a lot of the bad stuff is maybe over publicized too. Because if you talk to people like you're just individual people in the churches, most of them are they're just normal people.
Mhm.
They try to love God best they know how. But even sorry, all that being said, to another thought that went through my head is like I think even when pursuing healing or anything, I don't think you should ever. It's maybe just personal belief, but I don't think you should ever pursue God apart from humility. And I think that's where a lot of stuff gets twisted up. Um,
Mhm. Yeah.
in that, because I've seen a lot of people get really, really hurt by
Mhm.
even the healing thing of being like, I mean, I've seen people pass away with cancer that were standing for their healing, and then
Mhm.
everybody's just standing there wondering, like, what the hell, God? Like,
Yeah.
what? Why? Or
Mhm.
yeah, and so it
Yeah.
can
I think
cause a
that.
lot of hurt and confusion. But
Yeah, I think it's. I've tangled with a few people, charismatics, and locked horns pretty intensely on some of those questions. Um,
Me too.
because I mean, I deal with some chronic illness issues, right? Deal with the bipolar disorder. Doesn't go away. And and some lady, I remember in some prayer meeting I was in, really pressed the issue on me and says, God can heal you of that, you know. And I'm like, I'm sure he can. I'm sure he can, but I'm not asking to be healed of this disease. Like it teaches me more. I get more out of it. I mean, it's a pain to endure. All I was asking was just, you know, hey, can you guys be praying for me as I'm dealing with some of the things I deal with bipolar disorder? And it turned into this just because she started saying something along the lines of like, was talking against medications, right? And that those are, you know, she was using like just some really spurious reasoning that this is pharmakia is tied to witchcraft type stuff. And
yeah, because it's a verse in Revelation or something like that.
Geez. And I just was like that, I'm sorry, I understand what you're saying, and this is absurd. And here's like the 37,000 reasons why this is absurd, right? Kind of thing. And I left with a sense of, you know, while I appreciate and very much do believe that God can and does heal people, and I've seen it happen, right?
Yeah.
Is like, we're mortal, right? Our bodies are subject to all of the conditions of our mortality. And what overcomes that is the resurrection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we don't live fully within the resurrection, or I think we can, but it doesn't mean that we don't die. We don't pass through mortality, just like the Lord did, and that there is a space for suffering in the spiritual life. It doesn't say that the suffering itself is good, right? I don't think any suffering is good suffering, but the suffering can open us up to things that we could not have grown through or come to a deeper understanding of without the suffering.
Yeah, there's like a connection between suffering and glory or something like that.
Right. And
yeah.
And so it's like, I've had some intense tangles there, and it's just, you know, the realization is like, well, I'm probably not going to, you know, move an entire tradition in a direction that's more agreeable to me.
Yeah.
But,
well,
you know,
sorry,
it's like, and so I think that's where I kind of have always been kind of more comfortable being adjacent to those communities than within them directly. Like, it would probably, if I was going in on a week in, week out basis, like I would really have a hard time with it. But I sure love to meet with them, like, you know, once every couple of months, sit down and pray together and worship together and those kinds of things. Like, that's what that's the dosage I can handle.
yeah. I mean, it's probably the certain ones too. Like, there's still be somewhere there's but that's for me. Everybody's like that. People can just get so dogmatic in certain ideas, so headstrong that you can't. It's like talking to a wall. It really is. But yeah. That being said, I've gotten in tangles too, and it's almost about the exact opposite issue too. Because I would never say that God doesn't use medication or doesn't work through medication, but I'm just the type of person that doesn't want to take it. Like, I'm like, even if you tell me I should take it, I'm just like, no, I'll take my chances. Like, I'll just, no, whatever. And that's gotten me, and it's weird because even in the charismatic circles where like they believe for healing 100%, it's like there's, I've had pushback against that as well too, where people are like, no, you need to get this taken care of, or you need to take this, and I'm just like, no, just leave me alone. But I think maybe some of that is, I don't know why I'm that way. I've never, maybe it just, ever since I've been a kid, I never liked medicine, but no kid likes medicine. But then I think maybe some of it is too having an pain that I'm dealing with that no medication would help, no doctors could help. It was just like to where I'm just like, oh, whatever. Like the medication that, I mean, it was just pain pills, but you know, it never actually helped me at all. And I think some of the reason too, maybe why I'm a little bit that way, is I don't mind a crutch. Like, I don't mind having a crutch for humility, because ultimately, like, Christ is kind of a crutch too. Like, you lean on him all the time, you lean on God. But if something gets me into bondage, like, you know, I can easily get wrapped up in things. And maybe that's just my personality too, where even with like drinking or smoking or something. I think if I were to, I'm probably more of the type of person that would start doing it casually, and then before I know it, it's like I get wrapped up in nothing.
Mhm.
And so I think if I even became, I don't know why. I can't really psychoanalyzing myself here. I'm not really sure, but I have been the other way where it's been like kind of a pushback on certain issues. But
Mhm.
it's, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I've locked horns as well with a lot of them. And it gets really weird. Because there's, even with fasting, that's one thing I'd like to do. And I remember that was just a big thing when I first started fasting, because it was just like, it's just like legalism or something within a
Mhm.
lot of those circles. And so it
Mhm.
was just, yeah. And then you bringing up suffering, and that's like a foreign word in a lot of the circles I've been in.
Mhm.
But um, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with all that, except other than to say, I guess I do want to emphasize there is just a lot of good, and that's hidden in there that I think gets overlooked
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. Well, I think that, like, I think at some level, it's like, I don't want to paint with broad brushes. I know that, at some level, I think that uh, and I've dealt with a lot of those things. I've dealt with addictions, and I've dealt with, like, some pretty serious chronic pain and injuries and that kind of stuff.
yeah,
It's part of, treating my body like a bulldozer for most of my youth.
yeah,
It was always very active, and it was a wrestled high school and some in college, and there's old lingering injuries that,
oh yeah,
just as you get older, don't seem to get better. You realize, like, your body is in the aging process. But I think at a deeper level, right? Like, the spiritual life requires resistance in order to produce growth in the same way that the physical world does, right?
yeah,
There's a certain space for that it's that all of it can be wrapped into that redemptive arc for you and how you respond to it. And there are some truly, that with that, there is some kinds of suffering that we hit in this life that is just kind of like, just like Job would see, it's just truly baffling. There doesn't
hmm,
seem to be a good reason for it.
yeah,
But there's a lot of the suffering, or I would say the inconveniences of, having bodies that break down, and minds that aren't always sharp, and, all that kind of stuff. Is there that's the context in which our spiritual life is developing, right? And
uh-huh,
that there is, even Paul, like in Second Corinthians, speaking about that place of weakness, is, that the weakness is the strength, and that's, in Second Corinthians 12. But it's really the culmination of so much of what he's talking about in that letter, right? Is that this is the context in which, like, that indestructible life is growing and developing and showing itself forth. Um,
yeah,
so I guess I'm a little more, you know, uncomfortably comfortable with the fact that I have certain limitations. I have certain hurts that are part of what I carry with me, but
uncomfortably
like but I get to carry those with Christ.
yeah,
You know what I
hmm,
mean? And, like,
yeah,
you know, I'm now in my mid 40s, and you don't live that long without accumulating some regrets and some aches and some pains and some things that,
oh yeah,
it's a very different outlook than I had in my 20s, where the whole world seems in front of you in a way that, um, and it seems a little bit simpler and a little bit more cut and dry. But it's
yeah,
just like, 20 years of adulthood, or 20 plus years of adulthood, you realize, like, oh wow, it's a lot more complicated than this.
hmm,
um, but grace still meets me here, and in unique ways that, I would have been blind to when I was younger. Just because you
yeah,
don't have, because um, you know operate under the assumption that things are going to at some point get easier.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you get to a point where you're like, oh no, this is just life, man. This is going to be wire to wire struggle all the way through. But that doesn't diminish the goodness that is always there and present to us in the middle of whatever we battle through.
Can I ask you some questions on that? What is
Sure.
bipolar having that? What is that like exactly? Is that like extreme highs and extreme lows? That's how I've heard it described before.
Right.
But
It's a mood disorder. Basically, it is an experience from high to low. So you can go into very low depressive states, and that's
Gotcha, okay.
typically actually my default. And default is usually about, and my cycles are typically seasonal. So I spend about, I don't know, 6 to 8 months out of the year in like a mild low level depression. So it's like so low level that it's just the way I kind of operate.
Man. Yeah.
But sometimes the floor can drop out of that. They can go into pretty deep, scary depressions. Thankfully, like I haven't gone through a lot of those in the last couple of years, but they can creep up on me, and then it just will feel like the floor falls beneath. And it's really hard to, when you're depressed, my thoughts will slow down. Like my emotional life feels like the dimmer switch is turned, way down. So it's hard to even perceive what you're feeling, just a general sense of malaise.
Yeah.
You're trying to kind of climb out of that. It can go even deeper than that. You can just, feel like you get sucked down a black hole. But like I said, that's not my typical experience. But then you can go into, just a normal baseline mood where you feel just pretty decent. Right. And I love when that comes. I'm not in that baseline super often, but then they can go into like my accelerated mood states will be, it just tends to be higher energy on the good and the bad side of the mood. Right. So like high energy and bad mood tends to be very agitated, irritable, can be even a little bit erratic. But then if you're in like that good side of mania, it's like, it's pretty incredible, actually. Like your thoughts are firing like at an incredible rate. You're seeing a lot of interconnections, and it can be kind of a very creative, interesting place, but it's also can be very fragile and very brittle because you're not your thinking process, because you're feeling so great. So think of it like almost like what you would feel like on certain kinds of drugs. Like you're feeling so great that you're kind of blind to, let's say, things like consequences and, that kind of stuff. So decision making can get kind of erratic. But I've dealt with, I've done, stints with medication, without, depending on where, what my needs are. Then, lots of therapy. But I've found that, in recent years, and maybe this is part of the aging process too, but in recent years, I've found that spiritual practice has really helped me go within into those cycles with a lot more clarity, and kind of embracing the wide spectrum of what those mood states are. So even like a depressive mood state, I feel like, okay, when I can get to the place where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm kind of depressed right now. This is, my outlooks aren't particularly rosy here. Is that there a lot of times are things for me to,
sorry, I don't mean to, it's just relatable. Okay. It's like, it seems relatable. Like
right. Yeah. So it's like, I'll go into those with a sense of like spiritual curiosity.
Yeah.
Of like, what's there for me to learn. And same thing with the manias is, like I do have like a lot of, it's not uncommon for people who are bipolar to have kind of out of the normal range of experiences. So a lot of like my spiritual insights come in like visionary type form, right? And it can be very highly visual. And so like, especially like if I'm in kind of an ecstatic mood state, right? It's almost like it's like falling into a trance. And so a lot of what I would deem like real spiritual insights come through these really intense and arresting images, that will be kind of projected in the mind's eye. I don't typically, I mean, I've had experiences where I've seen things, right? That's very
Okay.
rare though, like
Yeah.
maybe a couple times in my life.
It's
where I'll
just
be,
like you get an idea, or do you get a specific picture, like in your brain? Do you mean?
sometimes a blend of both,
Okay.
but usually like there will be some kind of image associated with the idea.
Yeah.
So they're kind of will mutually reinforce each other.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Does that?
I've learned I've learned through my meditation practice, which is kind of I came across some writings in Irenaeus of Lyon on the seven heavens, right? And it's an interpretation of Isaiah 11:2.
Yeah. I heard you say that in one of your videos, and I wasn't sure what that was about.
Yeah, and so that tradition of the seven heavens is very important in like apocalyptic Judaism, and then also in early Christianity. So, but you kind of like you have these two repetitions. So the Irenaeus is working in the Greek text of Isaiah, right? And give me a second here, and I have a couple things written down on that, so I can kind of explain it a little bit better. I'm just going to go grab my notes here real quick.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay.
I have a quick question before you go into that as well.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Didn't know if you still had your earphones in there. When you get the visionary states, is it usually on your ecstatic or low, or is it vary?
It varies.
Okay.
It really
right.
does. Like I'm more prone to them in those ecstatic states.
Okay.
But
So the depression state's just all depressing then.
it can be, well, it can be, but a lot of times like that's where like you really have to, I've learned how to kind of fight through.
There's like a molding that's happening.
Mhm.
It seems like that's always, at least from my experience, it's where you learn to appreciate it. It's like Ecclesiastes 7, better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men.
Mhm.
So it's like in those low depressive states, it's like, yeah, it's something's pressing you and forming you in a way. And
Well,
so
it's like
when it's over, it's like almost better than before. Yeah.
Yeah, and the range of light, I mean, you have high frequency, like ultraviolet light outside of the visible spectrum, and that's the frequency is just basically bouncing, and you get down into your infrared and you just have this low frequency, but it's still light, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's like the frequency turns down with the moods.
Oh, and you said
But
the bottom one's like a red color?
the infrared spectrum
Okay,
is a
yeah.
much slower, kind of a lazy frequency, if you to put it in
And
simple
blue is
terms.
high on the spectrum, right?
Yeah, and so that's just it's moving. Its movement is it's a much more rapid, high frequency form of light, and so it's like your experience down in those subvisual, like kind of, I mean, infrared to the naked eye appears dark. You can't see it.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, but there is a frequency to that range of experience that appears like darkness, but it's not. And that's the thing that I've learned over the years is it will feel like darkness, right? Depression will feel like darkness because I'm depressed. Why wouldn't I feel that way? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think the aha moment came when I realized I'm not my feelings.
Yeah.
I'm experiencing my feelings, but I'm not those feelings. There's more to me than the phenomenon that I'm feeling right now.
Yeah.
And so there's a kind of a distancing, and you learn to observe yourself from a higher vantage point. Right.
Yeah.
And I would say
that's interesting.
I would say like from a Christian perspective, that's, if we're raised up with Christ and seated with him in the heavenly places, you can get that heavenly view of yourself.
That's interesting. That's interesting because in the charismatic circles I was brought up, and that's something they would emphasize, is that you are not your feelings. To a degree where people would walk away from that with a negative outlook on emotions, to where like emotions are
Right.
bad, where they'd be like, it's about faith, it's not about how you feel. So how you feel is not really how you are. And so it's like, it's almost this, like where it would go too far in the other direction, and it would be like, you
Right.
don't listen to your emotions anymore at all. And it's like
Yeah. So
but
and it's interesting because it's like my experience has been kind of quite the opposite, is
yeah.
understanding that, like, let's say, like, so it'll be very simple. Sometimes, like, I'll get really frustrated. Let's just say it's like a situation at work, and I'm driving home from work and I'm like, God, I'm angry. The question is, well, it's like, are you angry? Are you angry? Would be the
Mm.
question that God will ask me. It's like, am I angry? Like, am I taking on anger as my identity, is usually what he's driving at, right?
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
I
Yeah.
feel anger. Like, oh, okay,
Mm.
well, let's talk about that. You're
Yeah.
feeling anger. What are you feeling angry about?
Yeah.
What is the feeling? And so, like, the invitation of, kind of, in a sense, that disassociation from the emotion itself is not to deny the emotion. It's actually to give you space to observe it and to understand the emotion, and understand, like, emotions. Sometimes your emotion is perfectly fitting for the moment,
Yeah.
right? When you're holding your child in your arms and you're feeling this fullness and depth of love, that your feeling is appropriate to the situation, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Mm.
your sensations and your alignment as a human being are aligned, right?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, okay, those kinds of feelings are great.
Yeah.
But there are times when your feelings will tell you and distort your reality a little bit.
Yeah.
But the only way you can understand how they're distorting your reality is to actually allow yourself to feel them and to understand what they're saying and what
Yeah.
they're distorting, right?
Yeah.
So,
It
in that
reminds me of
situation,
Jonah.
yeah,
When God's like, yeah, is it right for you to be angry? He's kind of observing himself being, yeah.
yeah. And so you're, um, and that's been kind of, I do go through times of deep suffering with the mental illness stuff. And I get tired of it. I'm just like, God, when do I have to stop feeling this? And it's just, God's very kind and gentle. He says, Jed, you're going to feel all of it.
In the
Like, you're going
nicest
to,
way.
yeah, you're going to feel all of it. And it's like, okay.
Yeah.
And at least brings in the realism of, like, I don't have
Yeah.
to deny that I'm feeling something that I'm actually feeling. I
Yeah.
just also don't have to be burdened with the sense that my feelings are always telling me the truth about God or reality. Sometimes they
Yeah.
are, and sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
And so when you feel them, then it's like, and that's been helpful for me, because sometimes when I over-identify with my mood states, which is very easy to do, my
Yeah.
decision making can become, really gets thrown off, right? And
Yeah.
because you're not in a rational space all the time, like, you're kind of in your feelings.
Yeah.
So what I've learned in that process, like, learning to make that distinction, has helped me as I've kind of grown and matured through now 23, 24 years of living with this. Is it's helped me to also, in a very functional way, kind of live a more ordered life. But that hasn't come easily. Like, things that
Yeah.
would seem to come quite easy for people who don't have, that kind of a mood disorder, it just comes a little slower for me. But I feel like in the process, I'm really learning it. So I'll look at people who are kind of have advanced more in life in one respect or the other, and realize it's like, oh wow, they're like doing some really amazing things. But it would be kind of cool if they understood why it's working out the way it's working out. Because
Yeah.
sometimes I think we tend to live our lives kind of unaware of ourselves. And my experience with mental illness is it's made me more self-aware, because it's like, that's very much, my ability to have a healthy sense of self-awareness is important for just my own, actual health and safety, because it's a dangerous illness. Like, I
Yeah.
mean,
Oh, yeah.
statistically speaking, like, most of us don't live long lives. Whether that's because we're not taking care of ourselves physically, or in some cases, like, there's a high suicide rate for people with bipolar disorder. It's
Yeah.
like one of the highest per capita of any group in a population.
Oh, wow.
And so, and yeah, so you fight through some really dark stuff. And so you have to, for me, like, developing that sense of awareness is actually, like, it's not because, like, I'm some wonderfully spiritual person by nature. It's just like, in a similar sense of what drives you back, kind of drove you back into your faith, is like, there is a sense of, like, if I'm going to survive this life at all, like, I have to learn how to live within the conditions that I'm dealing with.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I've learned and grown through that. And it's kind of one of those things that I look at, it's like kind of that weakness that has opened me up to the experience of grace.
Yeah.
And it's affected me in that way, because I realize, like, how fragile things can be for me. Like, it's not
Yeah.
like in myself, I don't feel very indestructible. I feel like things can knock me out and knock me down. But in Christ, no, I feel like there is something indestructible inside of me, that, like, no circumstance can really ever overwhelm that.
Mm-hmm.
So there's, like,
Yeah.
a high degree of confidence there, but that's come through, it's come through just struggling through life.
Yeah. Sorry, I laughed earlier too. I'm not like mocking or anything, laughs. It's just
Oh,
one of
no,
those
no.
prayers where you pray to God, like, hey, yeah, make me feel better. No, sorry, you're gonna have to feel all of it. It's just like,
Right.
oh, man.
Well, and that's what,
But
I mean, that's the nature inherent to, like, Christ's own passion, right? The passion is to undergo and to experience, and he experienced all of the good and all of the bad.
Oh yeah.
Right. And I think that it's like, but the experience of the evil and the suffering that Christ encountered did not overwhelm, even in his cry of dereliction, was really, like, just the negative expression of his profound conviction that he was never forsaken.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Only, if you're offering that utterance in faith, like, you've already affirmed the opposite. No, I am not forsaken, even in asking the question. And so, I think we're called into a similar pattern of life. Now, I don't think everybody's called to deal with mental illness or those kinds of things. Like, I don't wish people to go through hardship or anything like that. But I just think it's kind of a brute fact of the human story. Like, we're all going to go through it. And different faith traditions can approach that problem in different ways. But I've had to find, I've kind of had to find a path through it for myself that, has involved kind of, more rooted more within, like, the Christian mystical tradition. I think that for whatever reason, I think I've been driven in that, down that road.
Which is fascinating, though, to hear you talk about it and stuff too. The seven heavens, what was that part? Because you were just getting ready to go into.
Oh, yeah. So
I'm familiar with this verse too. Is it also considered the seven spirits?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's all kind of there. So you kind of have this doubling, like, so you have like an ordering from basically top to bottom. Okay. So the highest heaven would be the heaven of wisdom. The one below that would be the heaven of understanding. The one below that would be the heaven of counsel. The one below that would be of courage or of might. The one below that is the courage of gnosis or knowledge. And then the one below that is there's two heavens of fear, right? And in Hebrew, it's using the same term, but it's translated in two different ways in two different ways in the Greek text, right? So fear is translated in the sixth heaven as Eusebius, right, which is to do with devotion. So the fear that gives rise to devotion itself. And then like the seventh heaven, which is the one that encircles our world, is the heaven of the fear of the Lord that fills this lower firmament of ours, right? And that's how Irenaeus is interpreting that seventh heaven, and the fear there is more tied to, like, its unhealthy manifestation would be terror and absolute sheer horror, right? That can be entailed in both the Greek and the Hebrew term involved there, but it can also positively be experienced as wonder or awe or reverence or respect, right? And so I was really struck by that idea, I don't know, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago. And I was like, wow, there seems like there's something there. Like, I felt like, because I had been kind of just in a time of contemplation. I'm like, Lord, what are those heavens? You know, where are they and what are they? When he's like, well, they're inside of you. They're within you. I was like, oh, okay, cool. What does that mean? And I just got kind of radio silence after that. It's like, okay, well, I guess I'm gonna have to find out when I find out, you know?
Yeah.
And, you know, fast forward through a couple of years, I was really had kind of gone more and more into studying the early church fathers, but also studying other religious texts and seeing some really interesting points of connection. And one of them was like, in certain of the yogic traditions, the way they describe what the chakras are is almost in total alignment with the way the Jewish and Christian tradition is describing the seven heavens, right? And so, and people have all kinds of opinions on that. I'm less interested in the chakras as, you know, like I'm not a Hindu, right? I'm not,
I'm not
coming at it from that either.
You don't have to worry about me. I'm not.
But what I found them to be, what was really interesting is like, oh, these are kind of, it's a useful map, right?
Mm-hmm.
Useful way of mapping the soul. And I would say like that these are kind of, if you want to put it in woo type categories, is energetic centers of the soul.
Okay.
That kind of have, you could say, work on different frequencies, right? Would be another way of describing it.
Is that why you put the colors with them as well? You send the colors to them? Or?
Yeah.
You have a color wheel, right?
Right.
Sorry,
right.
I don't mean to distract you. I just.
Right. Yeah. And so the way that I saw them working was like the seven heavens are spiritual dimensions, right?
Okay.
And I do draw a distinction between spirit and soul and psyche, right? And so like the energetic dimensions of the soul mirror the spiritual world, but they're still a part of this cosmos and this present world.
Okay.
There's a spiritual world beyond that.
Yeah.
And so and I was also reading in Margaret Barker, who writes a lot on the Hebrew Bible and temple mysticism, right? And another way of framing the same kind of thing, if you take the temple as the body, the 7-day structure of creation, so 6 days of creation and the seventh day of rest, is actually part of like how the tabernacle itself is constructed, right? So, you know, day one of creation is represented by the Holy of Holies, right? And then you can go all the way out to the outer courts when God has fully taken up his rest in the temple, and that would represent the seventh day. And so it's, you know, it's kind of a similar concept. So I use them in meditation, and the chakras are just useful kind of internal visual, not visual, but an internal sensory marker of where I will concentrate as I'm meditating. But it opens it up, and like there were some interesting experiences with it that I found shocking, but were kind of like what impelled me further toward exploring, is more of a means and a mechanism of exploring the content and the domains of those heavens themselves. And so, so my practice over the last couple of years is just, usually, I'm not always great about this, by the way, but typically about 10 minutes a day, meditating through one of the different heavens, right? And they can be, typically just very quiet contemplation. Nothing magical happens, that's usually the experience. But there are times when God's presence becomes quite palpable, and the things can get very, you can see things, like you see things with the mind's eye. And so and so a lot of times, like, those meditations can turn into extended conversations, right? Basically, like, kind of like I was at my dad's feet when I was a kid, always asking why and what about this, and kind of your dad teaches you, and God, as Father, gives us the same kind of instruction when we're willing to sit at his feet and just ask questions and be curious. And I can't say, like, that they're, revelations that are like binding on all or anything like that. I don't have those kind of pretenses, but they certainly have been revelatory for me, the way that I've seen and experienced God in his presence, I think. And not just God, but the company of all of creation in its redemptive finality. Like, I've had that experience. And so you can see the beauty and the wonder of it, and a realization that that world exists mysteriously even now, right? And so, like, for example, Paul goes up and he has this vision in the third heaven, right? And what he's describing there in 2 Corinthians chapter 2. He's not sure if he goes there in the body or not in the body, kind of thing. Well, if you know the kind of the seven heavens tradition that he's referencing, that is the heaven of counsel, okay, right? And in a sense, so Paul is taken up into the divine council room of heaven and given mysteries that are too wonderful to disclose, but he's in a sense, more than likely in that divine council room. That is actually a motif that shows up throughout the Old Testament scriptures, right? So God taking counsel among the gods, or among the Elohim or the angels, or those kinds of things, is even the book of Job starts as a divine council room discourse or disputation. Yeah. Right. Mm-hmm. That's the dimension that Paul is finding himself in, and being given revelation that's too much to reference. And if I had to take a guess at what it is, I think it's already alluded to in his first letter to the Corinthians. When he writes in chapter 15, basically this culmination of the grand cosmic story is that, Christ will hand over the kingdom to the Father, and God will be all in all. Okay. I think he's catching a glimpse of what that actually entails. And it, like, I mean, if you think about what that, even thinking into like the implications of what that could mean. Yeah. You could become kind of arrogant and proud, right? So Paul being afflicted with this thorn in his flesh is a means to keep him where God wants him, which is working from that place of weakness within the contingencies and frailties of his own humanity. He's carrying, like he talks about in 2 Corinthians, I think it's 4, that he has this treasure in earthen vessels that are pressed hard on every side but aren't broken, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But what's inside of you is the treasure that's hidden, and it awaits revelation, right? Awaits being brought fully into that hidden and invisible spiritual world, being brought fully manifest into the world of appearances as well. I think that's probably what he's seeing. And the only reason why I would say that is because in my meditations, there have been times where I've, whether this is absurdly ridiculous or not, like I felt like I've been in those places. They're seeing those things. And it's like, oh, I can see why he is saying like this is too much for words, because there's in a way, like what he's seeing there is something that defies our ability to articulate in any clear sense of what that will be.
Yeah. Do you find I mean, I think I'm totally tracking with you. Like, I understand what you're saying in that certain things are beyond language doesn't do them justice. Have you found any sort of language to try to get across those ideas? Is that where the images come in, you think?
Yeah, the images come in, and some of the things that I put up on my channel, and there's more. A lot of times it's like the videos I put up are kind of translations of those experiences that I've had, and trying to like pull from the domain of biblical studies, theology, philosophy, the things that I'd normally like to study anyways, but be able to use those as tools. Like what I'm doing is very different than I think maybe some of my friends who are theologians or philosophers, is they're using the discipline to advance the systems of thought that they're within. I'm using those systems to articulate experiences. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And I don't know if I'm always doing it well or doing it right, but I do know that like it's like there's things that I experience and I'm like, oh wow, I think that this is relevant and pertinent. So I like kind of in our discussion of and one I had with Nate a little bit on role of AI and angels and demons, I think was the one he put up on his channel. Some of these things are things that I see, but the principle of plenitude, right? That we are going to be involved in an infinitely unfolding story that is typified by kind of this co-creative activity that is happening between Christ and his church. I think that's what the bridal imagery is signifying, right? Is, what do you do after you get married? Well, in most instances, you go make babies, right? And in a sense, like, while I don't think that, the relationship between Christ and his bride fits perfectly well within the sexual metaphor, the reproductive and the creative metaphor, I think, still obtains, right? Is that we will be involved in this very productive, creative work together. That stretches on into basically the infinite. So as a mode of expressing the divine beauty in all of its radiant possibilities among the order of finite things. I didn't come to that insight because I thought about it. I came to that insight because I saw it. And so I found it was this arresting and shocking kind of experience, and I've experienced it in about 3 or 4 different times in different periods of prayer or meditation, all of which kind of were variations on a similar theme. And so I can get into that, but I do need to step away for just a quick minute.
Oh yeah, that's fine. I'm gonna grab another drink then if you're doing that.
Okay, I'm gonna push pause on the recording here. Okay, so we're back, and I'm kind of gonna relay a couple of those experiences that inform some of the things that Jason, you and I and Nate talked about in terms of like the infinity of creation itself. So one of them actually shows up. I wrote a book called The Damned May Enter, and this visionary sequence that I wrote of in the book was something that echoed something that I had experienced, right? And at the point in time when I had the experience, I was reading some of like the pre-Socratic philosophers, like Zeno was one of them, and he's the one who comes up with like the tortoise and the hare, and Zeno's arrow, right? Is an arrow ever moving at any one given moment in time? It's like it's not moving at any moment, but it's still finding its way to its destination, kind of thing. And I was thinking of that in terms of just like linear sequencing, right? So if I'm standing 10 feet from a wall and I walk half the distance, I go to 5 feet, then 2.5 feet, then 1.25, you know, and then you're kind of, but technically you never actually, if you're going, you know, step by step, half by half, you never actually arrive at the wall. Like you're only just cutting your distance to the wall by tiny little increments, right? Is kind of the idea. So anyway, I was just, you know, this was kind of before I had like a very structured meditation practice. Sometimes I just would sit and think on something and pray about it and be like, well, what about this and what about that? And that was kind of what had happened. And then I went into kind of a visionary experience where what was happening was I was standing kind of in the middle of like the cosmos. You could see galaxies and nebulas and all this kind of stuff. And then it kind of at the center point, in an indistinct center of the galaxy, was this radiant, glorious light. And I kind of knew I was like, you know, it was representing kind of the God's presence, right? And so was invited to take a step into the presence. And then after every step, like different things were happening in the cosmos around me, right? As I was seeing, like right now from our vantage point of our observation, I know there's, you know, like there's UFO and ET type speculation out there, but from the hard science, we have not yet been able to prove that life exists outside of this planet, right? The universe appears like we're the lonely living island in this vast, you know, vast stretches of basically space dust and space rocks and burning balls of gas, right? So taking a step further into that glory and then seeing like the signatures of life growing throughout the universe. So it was taking on, the cosmos was taking on this kind of blue and green signatures of life. Like our atmosphere appears blue from outer space and from our experience of it, right? And so I'd see like these different things, like life kind of growing and proliferating throughout the universe. And it was like life that was in this kind of divine harmony, right? And it was like, oh, this is cool. This is the kind of the future path that the universe is on, is to be full and teeming with life, and for that life to be self-consciously in God's presence, right? And so that was just like one progression. And the question was, well, have you yet arrived into my glory? And I was like, no, not yet. Like there's still more. It's like, well, take another step, right? And I was like, okay. So I take another step, and you know, as I'm taking further steps, the universe is taking on this kind of progressively this transfigured universe that's still emerging through some kind of struggle, but it's moving into awareness of itself as God's creation and in union with God as a result. And you know, so the steps would just keep progressing, and you're progressing further and further into glory, and the glory is driving the unfolding of the story itself into new horizons and vistas. And it would culminate to this point where this universe is complete. And then what was happening outside of that is it was almost like this fractal, it was like a big bang. There's like this fractal explosion of all kinds of worlds branching out of this world when it's finally reached its omega point, essentially. Is it became this fractal unfolding of divine glory. It was really dazzling. And so, you know, then like, you know, fast forward maybe a year and a half later, I'm reading Saint Gregory of Nyssa on his whole concept of epectasis, which is like an everlasting outstretching. I was like, oh yeah, I totally know what that is because I've experienced it. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh, what he's writing about, you know, 1600 years ago is totally like the conceptual framework of what that experience was like this further in kind of vision of what that could possibly be. And so it became like an intellectually formative experience that it took me a little while to arrive fully within that. But then I got into some of that, what the secondary vision was in a video I put up called the Khinsuki Cosmos. Like the Khinsuki art is like a Japanese kind of a Zen concept out of their wabi-sabi aesthetic, that a broken piece of pottery or porcelain or whatever can take on more value when it's fitted back together with this golden enamel. Right. So the original takes on new beauty because of its age and its fracturing, and becomes more valuable than what it was before it had been broken. And I was seeing like the stones in the heavenly Jerusalem, the temple is made of, it shines like gold, but it also takes on the properties of glass. And it was just like basically these glass blocks that looked like they had been dropped and fractured and then had been fitted back together with this gold that gave them like a golden appearance that at a distance just shined like gold, but it was translucent like glass. But when you got up close, what it was it kind of had like this fractal thumbprint of like in somebody's life. And I was looking at these bricks in this cosmic temple essentially, and asking the Lord what those are. And he's like, well, that's my people. So each one of these stones in the house of God was emblematic of somebody's life. But like what that is, if you get into modern cosmology and multiverse theory and all that kind of stuff, your life is, the life you experience is a fraction of the life that you actually have at the grandest scale. And that it comes together and it converges in a culmination that is the total reflection of what it means to say, Christ in me, the hope of glory, right? Is like every possibility where Christ can be glorified in your life will be glorified, right? And so, but the process comes through our brokenness and our weakness, and that becomes kind of this. It became kind of the New Jerusalem, that city of the Holy of Holies, is kind of the mystery of that first day of creation. And so it's this new creative power in the cosmos that God is using our stories to create new stories. And our accumulated experience of life in the world he's provided for us and give us new creative possibilities, that God is still the creator. Like we don't create independently of him, but he gives life to the stories and the worlds that are contemplated in our own imaginations. Also that the divine perfection can be displayed in those as well. And so it's like I wish I was better as a theologian or as a philosopher to be able to describe that in metaphysically tight language. And I can go there at times, but like these are experiences that were so immense that it gave me a sense of like, so for me here, it's like the hard part is you have this really lofty experience. Well, what does that mean here now? Well, it means I have to learn how to create well, which means I have to have a good imagination. Where is a good imagination formed? As it turns out, it's at the cross, right? If the cross reorients our conscious awareness and experience of the world, because it interrupts the natural cycle, which is kind of a zero-sum cycle of survival of the fittest, hierarchies of dominance and power, right? And it opens up this new non-zero sum reality where life gives itself to life, where God, the living God, gives his life as the life of the world. And in doing so creates it that is the new creation, is the cross. That's where creation is happening. And so the imagination that is formed there at the cross and is able to image forth its truth, there's really no limit on what you can imagine from that paradigm that can ultimately result in God being glorified and enjoyed by his creatures. So those experiences that I'll try to write about it. I did write on that one. I did a little article on my blog that was just had to do with like a brief philosophical and theological argument for that kind of a model. But those come out of my experiences first. And so it's a different, and I didn't used to be that way. I used to be the kind of guy who had to research the theology and the biblical interpretations and make the distinctions and all that kind of stuff. What I realized is that I had that almost completely backward. Is like, if I'm ever going to really know anything at all, like I have to have some kind of living encounter with it.
Yeah. Okay.
It can't be just the abstract world of philosophical and theological reasoning. Not to say that those are bad, like those can be really good, but they're just not the thing.
Yeah, they're almost not grounded or something too. It's like
they're
just lofty ideas. Yeah.
They can be. And it's like, you can't get around needing to use that language because some of those experiences are so immense. Like you have to kind of, your language is necessarily limiting what those experiences are by putting them into words, but it's your only way to translate it. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, but those experiences, it just tells me that, I think art does better.
But it's still limited. Yeah.
It still does. Yeah. It's still kind of but it opens up the ability for others to kind of interpret and come to a fuller understanding on their own. But what it taught me, Jason, is just like it opened up for me the kind of the limitless expanse of God's love that is always seeking out and generating what it loves. Mm-hmm. You know, it's creating what it loves and bringing that creation into his love. And so there's really no limit on that. And there's no limit on the experience of that kind of goodness. Which can be quite encouraging when you're going through, the difficulties and the struggles and the sufferings that life brings us. Is like, you know what, this isn't the whole story. This isn't even my whole story. This is just the limitations of my own experiences here and now, but there's so much more beyond that than what I have the ability to experience within my own limitations as they currently stand. We won't always have those, so.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, it's hard those experiences sound incredibly profound. They're kind of hard to wrap your mind around, especially the second one. I think is a little harder for me. Because I think because it's hard to imagine. I think our just imagination is so limited, which feels somewhat related to hope as well too, where it's like as you mentioned, the cinder blocks, it's like every possibility, and it kind of relates to the multiverse and everything like that, and it's all those things could be redeemed because we're restricted right now in possibilities. Like you have to make decisions, and you have to make pretty huge ones at certain parts of your life. Like that's how I describe at least how I perceive the multiverse sometimes, is that I'm like, there's this realm of possibilities, and there's all these different me's out there that I have to choose, especially at certain points where you can kind of feel it. Like a simple one is like, should I get married or should I not get married? Like, say you're dating a girl, and then there's this point where you got to make this decision, and it's like, if you go this way, you'll be a different person down the line. If you go this way, you'll be a different person. And it's like, that's at least how I perceive it. And so you're constricted in this world we live in now where you can't have all those, but then that's like, it's hard for your imagination to go there, and say, how could all those things be?
It's that Bob Dylan song that then it's, in what is it? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, like the question of how many roads must a man go down?
Yeah.
And I think that, based on my own experiences, all of them.
Yeah, that's a really good one.
And so like, even like Robert Frost's famous poem of two roads diverging in a yellow wood, right? He took one road that took all the different, that shaped his experience, and it makes all the difference. And I would argue, of course you're right, Robert. Of course you're right. However, you did take both roads.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's
like, and
interesting.
we go through those branches in our reality, and some of them are caused by terrible choices we make, but sometimes you're confronted with two good options,
Uh-huh. Yeah. Or two
and
bad options too.
or
Yeah.
two bad options, like
Yeah.
or a range of options. And it's um like the way I see that is like we do take all of those, like
That's interesting.
and so like our current storytelling
Do
is
you-
pushing up and opening those kind of vistas and those possibilities. So even like in the Marvel Cinematic Universe with like these multiverse theories, is they're kind of on the front line of advancing the concept. And I'm not saying that the way they're advancing it is totally the way things are, but the idea that no, there's more to you than just the domain of your own experience, right?
So do you think that you somehow experience that in this life, or do you think that's like some sort of, like you're talking about next life, where that you have the fractal explosion and then you get a
Right. So I think that I think in my own experience of that, like every universe represents its own range and branches of a total realm of possibility, all of which will be exhausted. But all of the possibilities that are, let's say, all the possibilities that I have in this universe, they're still finite, right? There's still a finite number. There's just a lot of them. There's just a large range of possibilities that I could do or be or become. And that kind of branches out, but there's a convergence at the final horizon, right? Is that every good thing that you could possibly be in this world is kind of is an approximation of the true self, right? The true self that is raised and co-seated and co-raised with
yeah.
Christ in God, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so your true self is basically the living image of Christ. And at the convergent point, all those possibilities of who and what you are that are redemptive and good and are reflective of the image converge into the one resurrected true self. And
Yeah.
I see that on the far end of the horizon that then becomes the explosive power. It's kind of like a convergence point, right? A nexus where everything meets and then opens back up again. And so like the encounter of God in judgment is like also what I've seen within that. And I'm not the only person who's seen it, because there's been other Christian writers who talked about that, is the encounter with the true self. Not only are you seeing God in the judgment, and this is what's terrifying about the judgment, is that you could see your true self and your true self may not recognize you. That's what Jesus is saying, because he is, in a sense, the image of the true self. When he says, "Depart from me, I never knew you." It's a horrendous, like a terrifying indictment of a life that missed the point, right? To where you are not even recognizable to yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I do think that we are involved in our own judgment
That's
in a very
interesting.
positive and affirming sense. Is that the choices we make, the ranges of choices that we make are productive and creative of the world. They help generate the world around us. We create the conditions of our own world with our choices in a lot of ways. Now, not all of our choices dictate what the world is, but we have a shaping power with the choices we make. They have a creative power. One choice will create the opportunity for the next choice, which will create, you know what I mean? Like, and we'll create a context where others can make similar choices.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where healthy communities can be such a creative center and a creative power, is because they're creating through choices that are coherent with, in a collective sense, with what God's created them to be, opens up new possibilities. That those choices are realizing themselves. And so it's like we actually, like, we have it's like everything that we are has been already determined in Christ, right? We're determined to be like him. That's why we were created. But the
Yeah.
path in which we grow into that can take just a myriad of different expressions.
Mhm.
and our responsibility of choosing within that is actually rather immense.
Uh-huh.
And and we're never, like, the cross forgives us of every evil deed, right? But we will still have an obligation and an opportunity to bring good where evil once was, right? And so that, like, even like the broken aspects of our story and the judgment get repaired. It's just that may be painful.
Oh yeah.
The process can be excruciating because you realize how short you fell of that. But it's not like you're being punished for sin in the sense that we typically think, is that the debt of goodness that you owe to God is an infinite debt, and he will require that goodness. And it's just, the more comfortable we get in freely accepting and expressing that goodness, the more positive our relationship to that final judgment actually becomes.
Yeah.
Because we realize that we're made in Christ's image and we have certain responsibilities there. And I in my own personal life, you can cite time and time again where I consistently fall short in that. But I also know that the trajectory of my life has changed as a result of some of those encounters.
Yeah. There's Cal had just sent me a podcast that I listened to last night. I went out so I could listen to it. I just went on a night drive. But there was one thing they said in there where they said one of the most painful things one of the guys in there said one of the most painful things I ever experienced was being forgiven. Because it's just, they were like, it completely strips you. Like it is in a way it is the judgment, because it just completely exposes you. And then he was saying there was another girl he kept trying to forgive, and she would get mad at him and say, I don't want your forgiveness. Like, the last thing I need. So there's this, this in one sense, reckoning with forgiveness is like, I mean, it's like this dual working of forgiveness and repentance. It's like, which is absolutely, like you said, excruciating sometimes. It's and it can feel like hell for sure. And it can be extremely painful because it's just, like, I like the way they put it. It just strips you naked. It just completely lays you bare in a way. Forgiveness does.
It does.
In the best way. I mean, in the most redeeming way. But it's it's hard to deal with. I don't know. But even when you were talking too, I just, even all the, like, the visionary states, hard to put into the language. But I feel like, I was going to ask you this too. Do you feel like people get the same ideas in multiple different ways? Because even when you were describing some of it in the fractal explosion thing, almost kind of made me think of the way Sherry talks about, I think if I'm probably gonna quote her wrong, but I think she said something similar to, like, it's wombs all the way up or something. And like the open circle, it's like a womb into another womb into another womb into another.
Yeah. Oh, Sherry's special.
Oh yeah. But she'll say things like that, and you're like, wait, hold on, I gotta think about this for like she'll make these statements where I'm like, I know you're probably right, but like, I got it. It's like an image. She'll give you an image, and you got to like meditate on it. And you're like, I need about 20 minutes so I can get back to you. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and Luke will talk about that in his mosaic vision type stuff too. And I think that. So I think that at some point I'll probably spend more time developing and teaching my own meditation techniques and those kinds of things. But I operate under no illusion that this is the only or primary way that people need to, or the only way that people are having these kinds of experiences.
Yeah.
Right. To me, what's important, and I think it can be individual and unique, and it should be, like, in that kind of mosaic of images within images within images within images. Like, you're going to experience those in a different way, but we all have a responsibility to cultivate a sense and awareness of God's presence. And that's not the same. It doesn't mean that, like, philosophical, theological, sociological, any kind of method of analysis or reasoning are bad, but that's not it. That's what we use to describe the thing. It's not the thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh-huh.
And so,
Yeah.
and
I ran
so,
into this too. I was trying to use the star, like my friend Mitch, I was trying to use the Star of David, and he was like, what is this? What is it? And I was like, I agree with you. It's not about this. I was like, this is just like, I'm trying to use it like a word. Like, it's just a picture. It's not about the picture. It's about the thing the picture's trying to represent. And I was just like,
mhm,
I was like, yeah, I totally understand. It's like, it's all
yeah,
images and languages trying to express the thought behind the thing, whatever that it's that see that even falls short, it feels like, but it's kind of, I don't know.
it's kind of like what I actually think speaking in tongues is, right?
Ah,
Um, so, I mean, that is a
that's
part of my practice, by the way. But I think that like what we see, in Pentecost in the speaking in tongues is something that the Spirit is acting as kind of this
it's the
universal
breaking.
translator, right? People are
It's
speaking in their own language and hearing it. The language gap is overcome,
mhm,
right?
yeah,
At Pentecost, and that's kind of a reversal of Babel in a sense,
yeah,
right? Is that your speaking in tongues is tying into the universal language of the Holy Spirit,
that's
and
I've had the same sense. Yeah, it seems like it's a breaking of vessels in a way, like
yeah,
because
it.
a word is just a body for a thought, right? And so when
Mhm,
you're like it's like shattering all those ideas, because it gives you a way to express something that can't be expressed in words, and
mhm.
it's incredibly profound once you actually start thinking about it more, and just how language, when you start to think about how language develops, how it actually develops, it's like speaking in tongues is one of the most incredible tools I think one can get into as well.
Yeah, and I think that that's the same kind of thing. Um, I do think that I mean, it's inherent in the Pentecost promise is, I will pour out my spirit on all flesh, right? There's no qualification there. I'm going to say I'll pour out my spirit on Christians, or, or I will pour out my spirit on my people,
Yeah,
right? I will pour out my spirit on all flesh. And, young and old are going to dream dreams and prophesy.
yeah,
Well, why is that?
yeah,
Well, it's the immediacy of the experience of the Spirit coming upon us.
yeah.
And
That's
and the way that we experience that is going to necessarily, for each of us, is necessarily going, like, we have such profound similarities to each other. So there'll be a common thread through those experiences, but it's necessarily going to be unique to the individual.
mhm,
But the responsibility that we have and the ability, like I would say, like with Sherry, right? Since I know Sherry pretty well, or reasonably well, like the reason why she's able to articulate things the way she does is because she's actually experienced them,
yeah, mhm,
right?
yeah, in a
And
very
and the
real
way,
personal way.
in a very real and personal way, and that's what makes her like exceedingly wise, even though, I don't think Sherry would classify herself as a philosopher or a theologian or anything of the sort. Like, she certainly is plenty
Yeah,
conversant
but
in that world because she experiences it in a very direct way, like
mhm. It's
and
like
in a way that,
it's a weird childlike wisdom that like surpasses all the philosophical wisdom, and it's just simple, and I I don't know how to describe it. I mean, it's not simple is not the right word, because it's incredibly profound at the same time. But yeah, it's just she is very wise, I would say. I couldn't
yeah,
agree
and
more.
I think that those are the things that, like I like in my own visionary experiences, I've seen that same spirit is still being poured out, in our own time, and in fact in increasing measure.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of like when Saul encounters the Spirit in these kind of positive and negative ways throughout his reign as king over Israel, right? He can experience that outpouring of the Holy Spirit in a kind of a madness that can be kind of destructive, because he doesn't have the inward capacity to translate what he's experiencing into a way that helps him rule cogently and wisely. And he also has these positive experiences as well. And even like kind of a protological speaking in tongues experience when he's kind of has this ecstatic utterances, before he's anointed as king. And I think that those are kind of protological ways of expressing, like, part of what we're experiencing of the madness of our time is an inability to translate the radical outpouring of the Spirit in our age that will be manifest in two ways. It will be manifest as glory, with the sons and daughters of God, but it will be manifest in a kind of madness in the world. And in a sense, it's exposing the world's madness. And it's not that, it's kind of, as heaven meets earth, there's a confrontation there.
Yeah.
Because it's also not only is it revealing the good, it's revealing the nature and the depth of the deception that it entails in evil and in the badness that is something that we all experience in our world. And so those things, like my sense of like, why are we in the apocalypse? Because all the things hidden from the foundation of the world are now being manifest. The nature and the structure, the nature and structure of our own damaged reality is showing itself forth. And we're seeing, I think we all are beginning to see the very real limits. Like, we're all facing these kind of limits of, man, we can't keep doing it this way, or things are going to fall apart. Yeah. Well, that in itself is a revelation, like, of there has to be a paradigm shift. Mm-hmm. And I happen as a Christian to think that paradigm shift has already happened. It happened at Calvary, and that it's kind of this irrepressible creative power that's unleashed in all of creation, making it what it actually is, calling it forth into the fullness of its own being. But that entails, struggle and conflict. But I think in that context, that's the context in which the sons of God are revealed. Right. And so I think, like, even in like charismatic communities, there's a sense of that. They have a very real sense of that, a developing sense of like that there's something, like to put it in Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure language, something strange things are afoot at the Circle K. Like I think they are intuiting some of that, but also other religious traditions are kind of grappling with some of these concepts, because history itself is its own kind of disclosure. But there's, I think in our time, I think that we're going to come up on some pretty radical inflection points that will call God's people into some very interesting work as our own times progress. And I see us kind of in that period before was kind of like the gathering storm, is a period where we are, what we need to be doing is really radically orienting ourselves within God's presence, so we can understand what's happening in our times, understand how we can speak and act within them.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's entirely clear at this point, but I think that picture is becoming clearer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. There's this grounding point you kind of got to hold on to. And I think it's related to what you talked about, the imagination being, I don't even remember the word you said, but having to be grounded at the cross or something like that. Because it is when the imagination's opened up, there's like all sorts of madness can pour through if it doesn't have that grounding, and all sorts of delusion. And it is it's absolutely terrifying when you think about it. If you don't have that grounding of what it could get into, because it's just like the world of the flood. It's just like a flood is coming. It's just a flood. Flood's coming, unless you have that grounding or arc or something, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. Um, I don't know. It is. I would completely agree, though. It does feel, and I think multiple people have said that too. That it feels like a shift. That everybody, and even talking to people, it's like you can express ideas that me and Cal were talking about this. It's like you get to this idea, and it's like, man, it took me like a year to get here, and you go to explain it to someone else, and they'll get it like this. And it's like, how is this happening? Like people are just feels like there has been this shift, some sort of like collective conscious shift where people are. I don't know what it is, but people can intuit things better. And in charismatic circles, I'm not really sure. It seems like they definitely um, have an intuitive, like inner sense for things that they can pick up on, but I don't know if they can always keep up. At least in the circles I've been in, it seems like philosophically and like theological discussions, they don't. I don't know that they can't. It's not that they can't keep up with them. I think there just might be a lack of interest or something,
Mhm.
or they think it's getting off into something. And I shouldn't say not valuable, but just to where I think I heard Paul Vanderklay say it a long time ago. It's like a lot of times he was saying from his encounter, it's not that people are ever ignorant. It's just they just don't want to pay the amount of attention to something, or it's not a lack of intelligence, it's a lack of attention or something like that. So I think I've
Mhm.
encountered that as well too, like where you'll get in conversations and some people they're just not interested. And so it's
Mhm.
like they could totally understand probably all the like everything, all these philosophical, theological ideas. It's just that they're too, I don't know, everybody's too busy. Everybody's got stuff going on though. It's totally
Yeah.
understandable. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I
Well,
don't know.
my ongoing debate with my charismatic friends, like, so they've kind of like one of the things that they discuss quite often. I don't know if you're familiar with this or not, because like charismatic and Pentecostal communities are very diverse in terms of like what things they're emphasizing within their own churches and their own communities.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But one of the things that I've encountered is like kind of this dominionist, and it comes out of like there's certain like the seven mountains prophecy type stuff. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm vaguely familiar, but
Right,
not
different
yeah.
domains of areas of culture and governance and all this kind of stuff that Christians are called into and to kind of govern and rule.
Yeah.
And it's like I get where it's coming from, but I think it's almost 100% totally wrong. But like it can only be as wrong as it is because it has some vital and valid intuition. Is yeah, we are called to be in the world, but we are called to rule, right? But how does Christ rule
Yeah.
in this
He
world?
dies.
He does it from the cross,
Yeah, he died. Yeah. Yeah. He dies. Yeah.
right?
This is behold your king. And then there he is dying on the
Yeah,
cross. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so his rule is actually expressed in something that is an inversion of all of our worldly
Yeah.
expectations of what rule looks like. Is the giving of the self, the service to the other, right? And
Yeah.
so I think that like and this is outside of outside of charismatic communities. It just takes a different flavor in different kinds of Christianity, right? Where there's this common assumption that we need to kind of have this kind of Christianized culture that we need to create and preserve and all these kinds of things. And I actually, I think that that's deeply confused, because I think that like the calling of the church is not to shape culture, is not to it will inevitably shape culture just because it's present in culture, but it's
Uh-huh.
like our responsibility is not to rule over that,
It's
or
11. Yeah.
yeah, it's
11.
a
Yeah.
leavening agent, but like our responsibility is simply to bear witness,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
is to testify,
It works from
you know.
like the inside out, not the outside in or something. It's
Right,
that. Yeah. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. And it's just like I mean, our Western culture, and I mean, you can talk about all the bad things within Western culture, and there's plenty of things to talk about there. But it has also been positively and irrevocably shaped by Christian testimony down through the last 2,000 years, right? So
Yeah.
it's shifted our own expectations on a whole range of things. We do not view the world today as a result of the presence of Christianity in history in the way that the ancients viewed the world. Right.
Yeah.
Our expectations, our ethical and moral expectations have shifted radically as a result of,
Yeah.
even the idea of like, even like a lot of non-Christian, people who are self-consciously non-Christian will be like, yeah, well, I try to abide by the golden rule and the Sermon on the Mount. It's like, well, why? Why
Yeah.
do you hold that ideal if you're not holding to the overall religious structures? Because, well, our society has completely shaped those expectations
Yeah.
radically, and even the critiques against that kind of stuff are still shaped by something that, by a seed Christ planted in the ground a long time ago.
Mhm.
And so I think that like it's like there's a kind of an inescapability and an inexorability of the kingdom growing, just like Christ said it did, like a seed that is planted and it grows into, a tree that can accommodate all kinds of life. And so that is already growing. And so our responsibility is not to, our responsibility is just kind of get out of the way and let it grow, in a sense. And the way that we can positively contribute to its growth is by bearing faithful witness and testimony in our own lives to that work. And so I don't think that like, it necessarily entails like conquest, right? We don't have to. It does entail a conquest, but only in the most ironic sort of way.
Yeah.
Right. It does entail
Mhm.
overcoming, but not through strife. And so I think that that's where a lot of like historically a lot of the Christian experience of like Christendom and all these kinds of ideas that we are, overly active in the realm of the state and in the political and cultural realms. It's like, well, we're inevitably going to be active there because we live in the world. But I think the paradigm is very different. And I think that we're called to something that kind of doesn't force that reality.
Yeah.
Right.
I would agree. And usually that agreement gets me in some trouble though. Like you probably experienced this. That's where you lock horns and things like that. But I think that the passion that people feel in getting involved in those sort of things in the political and all that sort of stuff is probably comes from a good place. Whoops, sorry. Hold on a sec.
Sure.
There's a stink bug. I can't get that on me, man. Those things are crazy. But yeah, I think it ultimately comes from a good place where people are just wanting what's good for the world. But then, yeah, it gets twisted, and it's my friend Mitch said this to me. It really stuck out to me. He said, and it was just so quick too, because I think it was maybe four of us in a conversation. He said, "Well, yeah, when you choose a hill to die on, you usually end up dying on it." And I was just like, for some reason, that stuck with me, and I was just thinking about it, like, yeah, I think that's true, but I think that the Christian way is like you've already died on it is the thing. It's probably how you need to approach it. Because like you got the whole seven mountain theology thing. It's like one of those can be extremely important to you, or whatever hill you want to choose to die on. It's like you need to have already died on it. And then it flips it, like you said. It's like because that's Christ on the cross, right? He becomes king. He's king of the hill, and then he's on the cross. It's like he's already dead before he ascends the hill, sort of thing. Yeah, and so it flips the whole structure of it, like you're talking about. Yeah, and it's not a conquest at that point. It's not you standing on the top of the hill cutting people's down who are trying to get up there to you. It's like you're almost carrying the hill at that point or something, or buried beneath it. I don't know what imagery you want to use, but it's yeah, the kingdom works in a totally different way. But that's it. Yeah, it is a hard thing to balance though, because people are. I think ultimately, at least I think begins probably with a state of love where people just see the world, or maybe it could even be fear though too, because people could look at the world and just say like, man, it's just crazy, so we need to do something about it, and they're reacting out of fear. I don't really know. I would hope it originally comes from a good a
Yeah, I
good
think that
place, which I
I
think
think
it
there's
does.
I think there's a mixture of good and bad motivations in that, and you know, but I think like where things become, I think like where we veer into the realm of danger that imperils your own spiritual existence,
Hmm.
right? And I think that this is realistically, we've seen times in history where this danger has manifest in reality, is when you are willing to endorse or engage in violence
Yeah,
to advance your agenda in the world. You've lost. You've
yeah.
already lost.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a
And like it's not like that's a particular problem that faces just our age. It's surfaced throughout the history of Christianity. Is some of the most apocalyptic violence ever committed in the world has been committed under the banner of the cross,
yeah. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's
which
a
means it's a total betrayal of the very thing that Christ is doing on the cross.
yeah, yeah. Which is why
And
oh, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, and so that's I think part of, like, I mean, I constantly come back to that. I mean, probably on almost any time I'm talking on YouTube, right? Is like that is the danger in our time. And
Hmm.
Christians are very, very prone to that very danger. And it's a danger to their own souls, that I don't think Christians have adequately grappled with. Right. So when I read news stories of Christian pastors agitating toward a civil war in America, that signals, that's like a canary in the coal mine. That signals real trouble on the horizon. Right.
Yeah, yeah,
And my advice to people who are in that, or are sitting under that kind of teaching, or are in that kind of mindset, is get out.
yeah. But they don't. A lot of times they don't want to. It gets stirred up in those
Right.
circles, and it's yeah. I don't know why it's so tasty to people. It's like a delicacy, and it gets very um yeah. I don't know why. I don't know why that is, but gosh, what was I gonna say? I was gonna oh yeah, just the danger you're talking about. Where I think Luke Thompson says that is like Christ and Antichrist are just a hair's breadth away or something like that. I think, and yeah, it's that idea. When I don't think hardly any. Uh, I mean, well, I shouldn't say that. It seems like people maybe recognize it. I think intuitively they recognize it, but not up here, and then that gets them into trouble. And a lot of Christians don't recognize that. Is that you enter into Christianity and it's so easy to become the betrayer, because it's like I've said this statement before, and my friend Mitch said you don't need to say that, it's really bad. But I've said before, I was like, I don't care what God you worship, like as long as it's on the mercy seat. Because I'm like, to me, I'm like any highest truth, any highest aim, any highest good, like God puts different things in all of our hearts. So any virtue you want to strive for, it's like go for it with all your heart, but just keep it on the mercy seat, because otherwise you're going to use that virtue at some point to start killing other people. Like even love, if love is the highest goal, it's like when I was resentful towards the church, it was like because I thought they weren't loving enough. It's like I'm holding love as this highest good, as the
Mhm.
best truth I can have, and then all of a sudden it becomes I'm using it as the judge to kill other people, and it's like that, and I forget the love that saved me, and so it's like I'm almost betraying the own love in the name of love. I'm betraying the love that saved me or something and stabbing it in the back. Sorry, everybody's out here yelling now.
No, it's okay. It sounds adventurous.
Well, I think everybody's showing up for the dinner for Kate's birthday party. So I probably gotta go in a few minutes.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Well,
but
I
yeah.
mean,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
we can definitely, in the future, pursue some of
Yeah,
these
there's a lot.
conversations more in the future for sure. So I mean, some of this is great just in a sense to be able to kind of get to know you and see kind of how your mind works and what, what the things are that God has put on your heart.
Well,
You
it's
know,
interesting because this topic we're on at the end, and like, well, kind of what we've been circling around a lot. There's certain topics where like I'll hear people talk about them, and I'm just like, this feels more closer to, I don't know if it's just what's needed or more, I guess just you'd probably say more foundational, when it's stuff that goes around the cross of Christ and is really around like forgiveness and love and those sort of things. Feel like there's a certain importance to them that um I'm not sure how to articulate it anyway, but there's still all these other ideas, like all these other branches I'd like to go off on with you too, like even with you're talking about the chakras and the seven heavens and the seven spirits, and then like I just want to know if that relates to the colors, the rainbow, like I'm sure it
oh yeah,
does, and alchemy, like the metals and the colors, all this stuff. It would be fun to go out and down those roads to you at some point. But like I said, they
yeah,
seem almost like, sometimes they seem like rabbit trails where I'm like, no, we're on something important right now. We don't need to take that route. But yeah.
yeah. I
But
mean,
even
I think it
sorry,
it
go
is
ahead.
like I found in that like a kind of, for me, it's like a paradigm. Like it's just it's a useful paradigm. Like, and if I'm working from the wrong one, I'm sure the Lord will make that known. But like I think in terms of, or if I need to shift, but I don't think that that's the case. I think like what I feel like he's shown me in that is a way for me personally
Yeah.
to be grounded in the presence of God in a way that um like with the bipolar stuff is like kind of, at times when I was younger, like I would get hit with the rush of the immediacy of these experiences with no way to contextualize or understand or sit with them and develop and gain understanding
Yeah.
of what it was that I was experiencing. And so like this was kind of, I think, a path that the Lord steered me on for my own development and growth. You know what I mean? And it's like I think
Yeah.
it's been really
Definitely.
useful. But I think that, the broader sense of, the kinds of things that are close to my heart is like, I'm, in many ways have kind of led a rough and tumble life. You know what I mean? But I think it's like, and I connect with people who have kind of gone through that kind of experience as well. Like so much of what was presented in Christianity is kind of like, love is the victory march, right? And it's like, well, it is, but very ironically,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I know. Right?
you know,
Yeah.
and and it's like, no, like I think that like from our own limitations and brokenness and woundedness and all those kinds of things is what is still open and present to all of us is a way to experience the love of God, and then not just to experience it but to express it.
Yeah.
And I think that at the end of the day is what is most important to me. Now, I don't
Yeah.
always embody that or do that perfectly myself, but that is what I try to grow toward.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the sense I get from you, Jason, is like that's something that's very much, animates just your perspective and your approach. And I appreciate that. I know you kind of got to get going here, so I don't
Oh,
want to keep you much
well, I
longer.
don't know where they went now. They might be inside. I probably gotta go soon. But yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
But
Yeah, I definitely agree. I'd love to talk to you more about it too. And I think maybe some of the little rabbit trails would be helpful for maybe people like you're talking about, like, because you said you don't know if you have the correct paradigm, but I don't think yours is wrong at all. And I don't think and I think it might be helpful to where if we could take one of the rabbit trails and maybe map on the similarities to where people,
sure.
I think maybe sometimes it's helpful because then people are like, oh, I can see it this way better. Like I was
Mhm,
talking about earlier with the wombs or the open circle or something.
mhm.
It's like you're almost saying the same thing. It's just in a different way. And I don't know if other people um be able to focus on or cling or understand a different image, because it's almost just like different images and different perspectives with the same thing. Like some
Mhm.
people would take more to maybe the idea of alchemy with the chakras, which might even be getting at the same thing. I'm not quite sure if it is yet,
Mhm.
but it'd be interesting to explore that more. I don't know. But
Yeah,
yeah,
well,
the one thing,
there's only seven notes on an octave, right? But
yeah, oh yeah, music
you can
too, yeah.
encompass you can encompass all kinds of sound.
Yeah.
There's a limitless possibility of what you can do with some very simple things.
Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
And so I think that's where, like, what I found with my own meditation practice is that it's not that it's the only, like, I found these 7 notes that are
Yeah.
the only thing that, it's the only way that people have to get there. It's just, it is an expression of something that I think is much bigger and much more universal. It's just that my entry point into that universal has been through this kind of particular practice.
Yeah.
And like, I've found it to be very enriching. And I get eyebrows raised from some Christian circles with, the question over chakras and, like, are you, engaging in witchcraft and dark magic and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like, no,
Well, I'm probably the wrong person
really.
to talk to. I just said before I got, who was I talking to? It was probably Cal. And I was just like, oh yeah, I think he said something. And I was like, oh, about coming on my channel too much and turning it into a universalist channel. And I was like, you don't have to worry about that. I was like, I'm too into pagan witchcraft stuff to, like, worry
Yeah.
about. Like, I love
Yeah.
all that stuff. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And I find the esoteric is very helpful.
Yeah.
And but it's
And
like,
occult symbols, it's like occult symbols are, gosh, if you just stop and pause and think about them, it's like that's what I mean with the star. Like, Christians would be more okay with the Star of David, but when you say like a hexagon, it's like, wait, a hex? No, that's witchcraft.
yeah,
Like, I don't know. And I'm like, it's just an image, and it's getting at a very profound idea here. But
yeah. And there's all different, like, I mean, the symbolic order I think it's because if you have a good sense of what the symbolic order is and the understanding of how to use it, and it can make you just more effective in what you're communicating and the truths you're trying to convey. Right.
yeah,
Because, like, there's really no way to immediately convey an experience. We're always having to mediate that through language and symbol.
yeah, which
And
kind of gets
so,
at, oh, sorry, go ahead.
so being able to make use of that symbolic order and to use that to communicate meaning, I think, is really valuable. And I think it's like, I don't see any particular privilege on the Christian symbolic lexicon over, other
Yeah,
domains and disciplines symbolic world. It's like there's a kind of transitivity to what those symbols are trying to convey. There's some very profoundly unique ones within Christianity. Our iconography is incredibly powerful,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And it's saying so much, even though it's not in words itself. It's coming to us in the form of living symbols. Like, I
Yeah,
definitely think there's something unique about Christian art and iconography, and the symbolic order of the Christian world and the Christian mind. I just think that is actually what enables us to communicate into other symbolic orders and to translate that, in a sense, to speak in tongues. Right.
yeah, that was exactly what I was, thinking about as you were
Yeah.
talking too. Because you said it's like the, I can't remember the word you're using now. I'll have to listen back. Like the language of the spirit or something like that. And it
Mhm.
just kind of reminded me, yeah, it's like when the language is, um, language is a useful tool to try to communicate an idea, but ultimately it's like, it's not, it's finite in a way. And le- tongues is almost trying to get back to like the real spirit of the thing, the real heart of the thing, the real poetic thought, whatever you want to get at. Because it's the same way, like, how is it that I can understand a dog? It's like a dog can speak to you. Like, it can, if you're actually listening and you're actually being humble. It's like, that's when I sometimes say, like, I think humility is like the purest form of language or something. Because if you're
Mhm.
actually listening with humility, you can understand just about anything. Like, a tree can start talking to you if you want. Just go look at a
Oh
tree,
yeah.
and yeah.
Oh
And so
yeah.
I think tongues is somewhat similar to that. It's kind of like the destruction of the Tower of Babel in a way. And it's,
Mhm.
getting back at like you're talking about, the
To
spirit.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The universality of the spirit and the presence of the spirit, I think, is really definitely worth exploring. But I do have to get going as well, Jason. So
Okay.
what we can do
Yeah.
is, definitely let's try to pick up on some more conversation here in the future. But man, it was cool
Yeah.
talking to you.
Yeah. Thanks so much for doing this too. Thanks for setting apart time. And yeah,
Awesome.
I've had a blast. So yeah.
All right. All right, man. Well, we'll have to get going here with another conversation soon. All right.
All right, cool. Let's stay in touch.
All right, sounds good.